Greetings, everyone. Daniel back again today with Dr. Dany Nobus, coming at us from London, where he's slightly under the weather, but has agreed to give us quite a treat of a presentation today. Before we jump in to today's conversation and presentation, I want to introduce Dr. Nobus to all of you. He is currently a professor of psychoanalytic psychology at Brunel, University of London. He's written over 9 books. Most recently, the recent title is A Critique of Psychoanalytic Reason, Studies in Lacanian Theory and Practice. And Dany's work, if I could say, speaking more personally, has really allowed, I think, readers of Lacan, particularly from English-speaking backgrounds, to bring down the level of intimidation that is usually associated with some of Lacan's more difficult works, and has offered, I think, a light of clarity into many of the not only more complex texts, but disputes and debates about the precise meaning of certain seminars and important texts in the Lacanian field. In this sense, a lot of what Professor Nobus provides is philological and intellectual history when it comes to the Lacanian field. He's also a practicing psychoanalyst who was trained in a Lacanian orientation. And today, we have the pleasure of learning about his newest project, which is a very, if I might say, ambitious enterprise, which is to write a biography of Jacques Lacan, which, when completed, will constitute the first major biography of Lacan in 30 years. The most well known being, of course, Elizabeth Roudanesco's Lacan and Company, which is a tour de force in its own right. So, Dany, welcome to our program. Thank you for being with us. Hello.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for your wonderful introduction.
Good. Yes. So, why a new biography on Lacan? What might we start with this question? What drove you to this
Sure.
sense? Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, you've already answered your own question by saying that when the book will eventually be finished, hopefully by this time next year or shortly thereafter, it will constitute the first biography of Lacan in 30 years. So there is at the moment only one full-length, in-depth, complete biography of Lacan, which is the one that most people working with or on Lacan know, i.e. the volume that was originally published in 1993 by Elisabeth Roudinesco. Now, within the space of 30 years, a lot has happened. A lot has happened that I think allows us, and I'll give you some examples of that later on, that allows us to paint a different picture of Lacan, the man, the husband, the father, the psychoanalyst, the lover, etc. So new archives have opened, for example. New information has become available. And that in itself, I think, is the best reason for starting a project such as this one, which, as you pointed out, is of course ambitious and not without its intrinsic difficulties, because, and we don't need to talk about that right now, because there is no centralized Lacan archive. So were you to write a new, yet another new biography of Freud, then your main archive would be the Sigmund Freud papers in Washington at the Library of Congress, which have now also been digitized. But with Lacan, there is no such thing. So there is already a major difficulty attached to gathering the documents and the information which and this is not available online, by the way, which has forced me and continues to force me to travel to various archives around the world, some of which are actually still in private hands. So there you go. It's been 30 years. We have new documents. We have new public and private archives. We have new information, and I thought that was a good enough reason.
Yes. So you've been traveling back and forth, mostly to France, Paris region as well. You said internationally. What other international visits have you made in this project, out of curiosity?
Well, if you're thinking about transatlantic visits, in the framework of this project, I haven't made any for the very simple reason that this thing called COVID has actually prevented me from doing so, one, and two, that I've had my hands full with the archives that are available in France.
Right.
To give you one example, the archive of Serge Leclerc, who was one of Lacan's closest collaborators for 30 years. That archive is not in Paris. It's in a center called Limec in Normandy. And that in itself contains almost 100 huge boxes of documents. So it's not the kind of thing that you go through and decipher within the space of a week. And that's just one, you see. But at some point, I will need to cross the Atlantic in order to look, for example, at the letters from Lacan to Roman Jacobson, which are available in the Roman Jacobson archive at MIT, to look at the letters from Lacan to Marie Bonaparte, which are actually now available, and this is very recent, because the whole Marie Bonaparte archive, not a whole, but most of it was actually closed until further notice, but it was recently opened, and these are at the Library of Congress.
Wow.
So there are documents that are in repositories on the other side of the Atlantic, but as I said, travel restrictions on the one hand, and the fact that I've had my hands full with the things I can do in Paris and other places in France have not taken me across the Atlantic just yet.
Understood. Wow. Well, I'm eager to get going. We have Dany's been so kind as to put together a bit of a slideshow. And so I thought maybe now we could jump in, and we'll be having a kind of conversation on top of looking at these very fascinating photos. What you're about to see is basically, I think in most cases, in many cases, really never seen before material in some ways.
In many cases, yeah. In many cases.
So without further ado, please.
I thought I would start with this slide by way of holding slide or thumbnail, I think it's called, partly because it's funny, because there is actually a hamlet in the south of France called Lacan. This isn't made up. Right, so there's nothing about this photograph that has been doctored. so there is a hamlet called Lacan in the south of France, and as you can, I think, see at the top of the signpost in Le Domaine de l'Hérault, it is called. But I also chose this picture because it kind of captures something about Lacan's character that will undoubtedly run through my entire biography. And what it captures is that if you're looking for Lacan, well, before long, you will come to the conclusion that although he might be right in front of you, at the same time, he's also always somewhere else. And it's only with hindsight that you will know whether the place where he was before was actually accurate. So this signpost, well, I mean, what it shows you is that Lacan is right there, but at the same time, of course, the arrow above it also shows that he's not there, that he's actually somewhere else, and that you need to go and find him in a different space. So when you write a biography, you try not only to get into your character, or at least I try and get into my character, but I also try to understand the character. And the more I read his correspondence and his work to some extent as well, the more I come to the conclusion that with Lacan, it's a case of a man who never simply was where he physically was, but was also already somewhere else. There you go. So that's why I chose this slide, and maybe we will see some examples of what I mean later on in the slideshow. Shall I move through it?
Absolutely. Yes.
I've decided to do it chronologically, Daniel. We could have taken a thematic approach, but I thought we'd do it chronologically. Now, there's quite a few images from Lacan as a young man. There's actually many more photographs of Lacan as a child and an adolescent than there are of Freud. That's partly to do with the fact that during the early 20th century, photography itself was much more common. But it's also to do with the fact that Lacan's family was actually well off. I mean, they could afford a camera, you see. But of all the photos that, and this one to the left, and of course the one to the right as well, but I'll tell you about the connection in a minute. The photograph to the left is in the public domain because it was included in this book here that was published on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Lacan's death in 1991 by Judith Miller. It's called Album Jacques Lacan. So this is not a new photograph, but I chose this one because I think the first thing I should say is that neither in Judith Miller's book nor anywhere else have I found any indication as to when this photograph would have been taken. And it's always very difficult to date photographs, especially when there is no context. But I think this photograph was taken either around the time of the end of the First World War or towards the end of the First World War. But I tend to go for the former rather than the latter. I mean, it's clearly a formal photograph. This is, although it's a photograph of the three Lacan children, Jacques-Marie to the left, his sister Madeleine Jacques Marie to the right, his sister to the left, and his younger brother Marc Marie in the middle. So it's a photograph of the three children, but it's a formal picture. So I wouldn't be surprised if after, at the end of the First World War, the Lacan family decided to have some pictures taken as part of the celebrations, you could say. But I mean, when you look at this photograph, and especially at Lacan, it's there's something particularly striking. I mean, the first thing that is striking is that if it is indeed true that this was taken at the end of the First World War, he would have been 17 years old. 17. Now, although it's a formal picture, I mean, this young man does not dress like a 17-year-old. So he has either chosen, and I'm pretty sure it was chosen rather than imposed upon him. He has either chosen or insisted to dress up like an established bourgeois, if not to say haute bourgeois person, unlike his siblings.
But you said that his parents were well off.
Yes.
Would you qualify them as a bourgeois family?
Yes. I mean,
could you say something about their occupations and how they made their money and so on?
Well, that would take me very long, but what I can say is that Lacan's father, Alfred, was a merchant, a representative is probably a more correct word, a representative for a very famous vinegar company. But as such, so as a representative, he's not someone who had to work every day like my own father, in a blue collar environment. He was someone who occupied a senior role in this Parisian branch of the company, and basically that's what allowed them to live what I would call a very comfortable life during the early 20th century. But at the same time, I mean, I could talk much more about it, but I want to talk about Lacan, that is to say, the boy here in the picture. At the same time, whereas his two siblings are still dressed, if you compare this to other pictures from the same period, I mean, their dress is relatively informal. It's clearly that the man to the right here dresses above his age, you could say, or at least in a way that makes him stand out, literally and metaphorically. But again, whenever I look at it, I'm also puzzled, and that's why, in a sense, I wouldn't have wanted the Holbein picture to appear immediately. I'm always puzzled by the look on this young man's face. I mean, he does look at the camera, unlike his younger brother, who looks away. But is he smiling? Is he grinning? Is he smirking? I'm always thinking, what is going on behind his eyes, right? And invariably, and this is going to be incongruous in itself, invariably I'm reminded of the Holbein portrait of Thomas More that is in the Frick collection in New York. And And I think the reason why, and of course Thomas More here is much older than the young Lacan, much, much older. But this portrait has been studied. And it's one of the most famous Holbein paintings, apart from the Ambassadors, I guess. So it's been studied for hundreds of years. But also it's been studied by Thomas More biographers in terms of how it shows the character of Thomas More. And one of the most interesting commentaries on it probably comes from Stephen Greenblatt, who talks about it and other Holbein pictures in the context of Renaissance self-fashioning. And I love that word, which is going to run through the early chapters of my book as well, because there is something very stately about the pose, but there is also something inscrutable about the look on these two persons' faces, I would say. Which is almost as inscrutable as the quote unquote smile of the Mona Lisa. I don't know what you see when you look at Lacan in this picture.
Well, before your comments, I certainly didn't see as much as you're bringing out for us here. To consider. But certainly much to ponder. Certainly much to ponder. Of course, the hairstyle is quite well oiled, it seems, and organized quite nicely. And the pose in his with the casualness in the pocket, he seems as if he's the only one who is well composed and very different than the other two siblings, perhaps.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
I mean, although he was very close with his younger brother, who, I mean, that's a completely different story, who at some point decided to become a monk. This picture shows that it shows closeness and distance at the same time. You see, I'm going to use Greenblatt's word, but by the way in which Lacan, already at the age of 17, has decided to self-fashion or self-style himself as someone who exists, who lives, also in his mind, over and above his siblings. But there you go. So that was my first picture of the youngish Lacan. Shall we move on?
Absolutely, yeah.
This is a picture, and again, it is in the public domain, and I promise I will show you pictures that have never been seen before. But this one is also included in Judith Miller's book. This is a picture from 1931 that was taken at a time when Lacan was in his final year of his psychiatry training. And he completed his final year at the Hôpital Henri Roussel, where he would subsequently also deliver, 20 years later, his bi-weekly clinical presentations. Not his seminar, but his clinical presentations. But the Hôpital Henri Roussel, that's an interesting story in itself, was actually the first outpatient psychiatric clinic in France. So this is a picture of the staff. The person sitting at the front, I mean, in the meantime, you should have found Lacan. I don't think he's difficult to find, so I don't need to point him out, right? And the person sitting in the middle at the front would become a close colleague of Lacan's. This is Henri A, who actually set up his own psychiatric group and a journal that still exists called L'Évolution Psychiatrique. The reason why I've chosen this picture is partly because, again, you see, when you compare the way Lacan sits or strikes opposed to the others, he kind of stands out. It's not as formal a picture as the previous one, because it's a picture of the staff, but still, he kind of stands out. To the point, I've shown this picture to people who don't know Lacan at all. And I've asked them about their reaction to the people in the picture. And almost everyone, before long, if not within a minute, asks, well, this is a strange looking man there to the left. It's as if he doesn't completely fit in, or at least it's as if he's there but not there at the same time.
That's right.
Which of course is true.
Yes.
Because in 1931, Lacan was finishing his psychiatric training, but a lot of the time he was elsewhere. A lot of the time he was, not only spending time with numerous women, that's another story, but a lot of the time he was to be found in artistic circles, especially at events organized by the Surrealists. And so, you see, unlike Henri A, who was, by the way, only 1 year older than Lacan, and who is dressed, in the standard white coat of the psychiatrist, Lacan there, he's there, but at the same time he's also somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean,
and I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think he has a cigarette in his hand too. He seems I don't know, like the rebel hipster, or the kind of too cool for school. Like,
sure.
Sure. Like he's obviously the one who exemplifies a profound style, and he has a kind of I don't know, it's an extreme intensity, looking directly at the camera.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Maybe I should have said, and then we can move on, that during his medical and his psychiatric training, this was not a man who had a great many friends. He was generally considered to be arrogant. To be dismissive and patronizing, especially towards the hospital staff, by which I mean towards the nurses and the technicians or other people who are not medical doctors. And as you may have read in her book, Jacques Lacan, the Sophist, Barbara Cassin tells this wonderful story at the beginning of her book, Jacques the Sophist, where, I mean, is this true? We don't know, but where at one point the kitchen staff was so fed up with being treated so badly by this young man called Lacan that they actually served him, nicely cooked, but still, they served him a placenta.
Oh my God.
So so he did not have many friends, and I think again it has something to do with the fact that he wasn't the most likable colleague or the most generous student amongst his fellow students, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's move on. Now, again, I wish that the picture to the right here had appeared later, for all kinds of reasons, but it can't be helped. What you see to the left is a newspaper clipping that I found that announces the wedding of le docteur Jacques Lacan. And that's obviously how, after he was awarded his title of doctor, he would always be known. So everyone I've spoken to who knew Lacan, sometimes knew him closely, tended to refer to him as le docteur Lacan. Le docteur Lacan. That's actually also how he referred to himself, or how he would introduce himself. But so this is an announcement of the wedding. I should add, it's an announcement of the church wedding, because it's not unusual, but in the Roman Catholic Church, you need to have the legal part that you do in the town hall, and then you have the religious part that you do in a church of your choosing, and the two events do not necessarily take place on the same day. So if you read Rudinesco's biography, you will see that she says that Lacan got married to Marie-Louise Blondin on the 29th of January 1934, which is obviously different from early February 1934, because the announcement says here that the wedding, it's at the bottom. If you can't read the French, it says at the bottom, the wedding took place yesterday. So that would have been the 1st of February 1934, in the church of Sainte Marie de Batignolles, which is something that Rudinesco, but I mean, you know, bless her, wait and see how many factual errors I will make. But this is actually something that Rudinesco gets wrong in her biography. So yes, she got married in church, but she got the name of the church wrong.
And who was this woman briefly? What did she
Yes.
share Lacan's interest in the avant-garde and surrealism?
No, not at all. So this woman, Marie-Louise Blondin, who wanted to be called Malou, and that's how everyone would refer to her, but Malou is short for Marie-Louise, was actually the sister of a friend of Lacan. And again, Rudinesco doesn't say all that much about her own background or her subsequent life, but she was effectively a graphic designer and an illustrator. So she had some artistic talent, but she was by no means an artist. So one of the things that she would do was to, I've actually found some examples of that, but I can't project everything, is to make illustrations for French translations of the works of Jane Austen, for example. So she would illustrate novels that were translated into French. So although her family background was of the same she had the same social status as Lacan, she was essentially an attractive young woman who was actually quite conventional in her tastes and her attitudes, and who, unlike Lacan, was by no means, because that's also where he wanted to be, she was by no means interested in constantly being on the vanguard or at the forefront or constantly looking for new ideas. She was quite happy to live her life, which is what she did, as an illustrator of books. The picture in the middle shows Malou, Marie-Louise Blondin, with Lacan's first daughter, Caroline. Caroline was born on, let me think now, on the 29th of, sorry, no, she was born on the 8th of January, 1937. So this picture in the middle, I would say, was taken when Caroline was probably about, I would say, a year and a half going on 2. I don't know if you have kids, Daniel. I'd say we're probably looking at a girl who is maximum 2 years old, I would say. I'd say about a year and a half, something like that. If you disagree, feel free to interrupt, Daniel.
No, it seems possible. Maybe 3. Yeah.
You think? Oh, okay. In any case, so this picture, so if you think, so Caroline was born on the 8th of January 1937.
Mm-hmm.
So this picture would have been taken, I would say, sometime in 1939.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, at that time, Lacan had already started an affair with the woman on the right, and the woman on the right was a woman, and that's in a sense also what the picture shows, was a woman who couldn't have been, not necessarily physically, but couldn't have been more different from Marie-Louise in her interests, in her connections, in her aspirations, etc., etc. So by the time the picture in the middle was taken, Lacan had fallen in love with Sylvia Bataille, but Bataille was not her actual surname. Her actual surname was Maclès. But she had adopted the name of Sylvia Bataille because she was married to Georges Bataille until 1934, and didn't get legally divorced. That's another story, from Bataille until much later. So that's why she kept the name Sylvia Bataille, and she was actually, so she was an actress. And during the 1930s, she had already starred in quite a few films. We're talking about 12, 13 films, and she had gained particular success with a role in a film by Jean Renoir called Une partie de campagne, or in English, a day in the countryside. And so the picture that you see to the right was actually taken by a famous surrealist photographer called Denise Bellon. And it's a wonderful picture. Not only because it's a gelatin silver print, but I mean, it's actually part of a series. But stylistically and the shades and then the lighting is absolutely fantastic. Apart from the fact, of course, that it also shows Sylvia Bataille half naked. But I think the glamour, the success, the connections, the aspirations, the world that Sylvia Bataille represented at the time couldn't have been different from from the conventional, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, right? Mm-hmm. From the conventional, devoted, standard lifestyle that Malou would have represented.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I'm
he was
starting.
so Lacan. Yeah, sorry, Daniel. Go ahead.
I'm starting to get the sense that Malou was the safe bet, the familial choice, so to speak. Now, was Lacan's affair concurrent to his uh, growing notoriety over the case of Aimé? So was it around this time that his name was becoming more widely known in Parisian intellectual circles?
Um, the short answer is yes, but during the 1930s, it's by no means the case that Jacques Lacan was internationally recognized, or that even in France, he was widely celebrated. Yes, he was not just by the surrealists, by the way, but also by the psychiatrists themselves. And I can't remember now whether Rudinesco mentions this, but his doctoral thesis actually won a prize, a psychiatric prize. So he was recognized as an original thinker in the field, but we should not make too much of that.
Sure.
By which I mean that she was much more a public figure than he was.
Right. Well,
and she was definitely also much more connected than he was, because her sister was married to André Masson, the painter. André Masson knew Picasso, and so it goes on and on and on and on and on. You see, yeah.
Well, I brought up the case of Aimé, so at some point we should, for the benefit of listeners, say something about that. But maybe you plan to mention it at some point.
I wasn't going to mention it because there's only so much you can say.
Right.
So feel free to ask me about it now.
Well,
I
yes.
would
So
say
let me do that. I mean, in part, it was what put Lacan on the map, insofar as the case itself had a lot of popular intrigue, because it had an attempted murder involved with it, and so it was appealing at a kind of narrative level. When you just simply learn about the case of Aimé, which maybe I would invite you to briefly summarize, it's interesting. I mean, it's crazy, right? And Lacan, of course, for the psychiatric community, develops a method of the treatment of psychosis which would be revolutionary. But at the popular level, it was interesting also because Aimé was a young woman who wanted to be famous. And that desire was at the heart of her story, and is also, in fact, at the heart of Lacan's
yes,
desire. So there's an interesting emergence or coalescence.
yes, yes,
There. Yeah.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. And by the way, the pseudonym Aimé, because that was not her real name, but the pseudonym Aimé means the loved one or the beloved, So, I mean, you've already, in a sense, summarized some parts of it, but Lacan's doctoral dissertation, which was a doctor of medicine, it's not a PhD, it's a doctor of medicine dissertation, was built around the writings. Maybe I should also emphasize that. It was built around the writings of this woman he designated as Aimé, who had attempted to kill a stage actress. So there's a certain connection, not only with the notoriety of the case that was at the heart of his dissertation, but also with the actress and the performance of the woman involved. I mean, look, the reason why both the serialists and the psychiatric community very much appreciated what Lacan had done is not because he was the first one to be interested in the writings of psychotic patients. I mean, other people had done it before him. But it was because of how he managed to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, apply, and that is to say, in this case, also extend psychiatric knowledge about paranoia, because it's a dissertation on paranoia and erotomania, more specifically, to extend that knowledge alongside the study of the writings of this patient, using a framework that was both informed by classic psychiatric knowledge. And we're talking Kraepelin, for example, but also Kretschmer, phenomenology, and here we're talking Minkowski, for example, but also Jaspers, and psychoanalysis. Because by the time that Lacan submitted his doctoral dissertation in 1932, he had already, that's another story again, he had already read Freud, so he had already developed an interest in psychoanalysis, despite the fact that he wouldn't start his psychiatric training until after him becoming Dr. Jacques Lacan. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the short version.
Yep.
Shall we move on?
Please. Absolutely.
Now, this picture definitely has never been shown. It's not in the public domain. And I should apologize for the fact that it's slightly grainy. It's because the original is small. And it's not a gelatin silver print, unlike the picture of Sylvia Bataille. I'm not going to identify all the people. I mean, I could, but it's kind of irrelevant. This picture was taken on the 14th of July, 1939. And if you know a little bit about French history, then you would know that the 14th of July is a national holiday. It's called Bastille Day. So this is when the French celebrate the abolition of the monarchy. So it's the day of massive celebrations. It was taken on the 14th of July, 1939, so just before the Second World War. And what you see here is a small group of people who decide to have a cardboard cutout picture in a car. I have no idea where exactly this cardboard cutout would have been. But the people themselves constituted a group of attendees plus the master in charge of the Kojève, the Alexandre Kojève seminar.
I thought I recognized Kojève himself there. Yeah.
So the guy with the dark glasses there.
That's him.
That's obviously Kojève.
Yeah.
Very recognizable. The other guy with the glasses, with the third from the left, is Robert Marjolin. Now this and it's in the archive of Robert Marjolin that I found this picture. He became an extremely famous economist and politician who was to some extent instrumental in the creation of the European Union. Now, who's at the wheel? Le Docteur Lacan. I mean, people have said to me, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Look, there was no one else at the time in the circles of Alexandre Kojève, Robert Marjolin. I could name some of the other figures, including the women, who looked like that. No one else. Only one person looked like this driver, and this was Lacan. Apart from the fact that he was the kind of guy who would have wanted to be in the driver's seat, by the way.
So this was the time of Kojève's famous seminars on Hegel's phenomenology of spirit.
Yes. And I think this picture was taken to celebrate, and there was never going to be another one because of the war, you see. So remember the date, the 14th of July, 1939. So this was the last year. Did they know that it was going to be the final year? I'm not sure. But this was effectively the last, and it would become the final year of Kojève's a year-long, 6-year-long seminar on Hegel that Lacan attended. And again, you see, it kind of shows that here you have a man who he's in analysis with Lowenstein. So he's training as a psychoanalyst. He's practicing as a psychiatrist. So during the 1930s, Lacan has hardly any psychoanalytic patients. So how is he making his money as a mainstream psychiatrist? But where is his head? Well, his head is elsewhere. Yes. So le Dr. Lacan can be found at a seminar where people are reading line by line the phenomenology of spirit. Right? One of the densest philosophical texts ever written. Of course, also because at that seminar, the Parisian intelligentsia would have wanted to be seen, and Lacan wanted to be part of.
And everyone was there in a sense. Jean-Paul Sartre there.
No, I don't think that Sartre ever attended. He definitely didn't attend on a regular basis.
Okay.
If he attended, it would have been occasionally, but I would need to look that up. But Bataille was there, Georges Bataille was there, Roger Caillois was there, some famous French writers were there, such as Raymond Queneau. It's actually thanks to Queneau that the text of the seminar has survived. So this was a gathering. It was a weekly gathering of people coming from various backgrounds, but Lacan was the only psychiatrist. I haven't come across any other psychiatrist who was interested in Hegel. You can say, well, why would you, right? But the reason why I decided to show this picture is that because the group was a very close-knit group. So it's not by accident that they all decided to go out on Bastille Day. So it was a close-knit group. And the years that Lacan spent at Kojève's seminar, and I'm going to tell you now something that you already know, would actually become very formative, intellectually formative for Lacan's subsequent reinterpretation of Freud. To the point that, I would say, and I'll give you an example in a minute, in something else that has never been shown before, to the point that I think Lacan took away from the Kojève seminar a certain methodology, a certain style of teaching, or a certain style of engaging with the text. But what he also took away from it is a certain intellectual principle that I would call, well, actually that Lacan himself called dialectics. Dialectical thinking, dialectical processing, etc. Shall we move on?
Sure.
Now, there you go. There you have it. Talk about dialectics. So what I'm showing you here is the first page in the middle It's the first page of a 39-page manuscript that Rudinesco doesn't mention because until very recently, until I found it, this 39-page manuscript by Lacan was deemed completely lost. So this is a manuscript of 3 lectures. The handwriting is not easy to decipher, but the first sentence, I will read it out in French and then translate it. It says, Les 3 cours doivent tenter de définir l'expérience analytique. Et j'ai marqué au début les personnes à qui je croyais m'adresser. That's the first line. So in English, it said the 3 lectures set themselves up as geared towards defining analytic experience. And I said at the beginning of the 3 lectures, the audience to which I was going to address myself. And then he goes on. And at the bottom of the first page, I think it's the 4th or the 5th line from the bottom, you actually see that he, from the beginning, he defines psychoanalysis as a dialectical experience. You can just about figure out the word dialectique there, right, at the bottom. So this manuscript was deemed lost, and this is effectively the text of 3 lectures that Lacan gave in December 1951, June 1952, February 1953, for the one and the only psychoanalytic society that existed at the time in France. That's the Société Psychanalytique de Paris. And so the reason why he gave those lectures is because he wanted to, how shall I put it? He wanted to innovate the way in which psychoanalysis was practiced and the theory of psychoanalysis within the society to which he belonged. And maybe if the splits, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, and maybe if the splits in the French psychoanalytic community had never happened, maybe what we would have left with now is not the idea of Lacanian psychoanalysis. Maybe what we would have left with is the idea of dialectical psychoanalysis. Because that's what Lacan called his allegedly new approach, which was to some extent, not exclusively, but which to some extent was based on this very controversial principle of the variable length session. So the principle that not every session should last 45 or 50 minutes. Now, before you comment, Daniel, I should say that you find a little trace of this 39-page manuscript, a little trace in a text that is included in the écrit called Presentation on Transference, which is effectively Lacan's rereading in a dialectical way of Freud's case study of Dora. That's the woman whose image you see to the left at the bottom. But, and again, that's another story which I could talk about for hours and hours and which Rudinesco doesn't talk about at all. But I have found evidence, clear evidence, that this text, Presentation on Transference, is also informed by Lacan's work on another Dora. So it's not just Freud's Dora. It's another Dora, and it's the Dora whose picture is to the right, and that's Dora Maar. Dora Maar, who was at one point Picasso's lover, and who, when Picasso dumped her, she almost dumped herself. So she tried to jump into the Seine. She was first treated by Lacan at a psychiatric hospital, and then started an analysis with Lacan during the late 1940s, early 1950s. And so in the archive of Dora Maar, there are some notes about her analysis, which are interesting to read because it gives you an insight, as always, into what was done and what was said. And that then subsequently fed into what Lacan at the time was calling dialectical psychoanalysis.
The two Doras.
The two Doras. The two Doras.
How much in the literature on Lacan has been written on Lacan's Dora?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Mm-mm.
Wow.
Well, the only thing that's been written is that he is, I mean, maybe 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
But so one of the things I intend to do in my biography is to focus more than Rudinesco does on his clinical work with some of the patients that he treated, including in this case, for example, including Dora Maar.
So was the intervention of Lacan with Dora Maar, would you characterize it as successful? Did she cease from suicidal ideations? Was she cured in some sense, or?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting question. After her analysis with Lacan, Dora Maar lived and continued to live until I think she was well into her 90s, a relatively happy life. She never again tried to commit suicide. She continued to work as an artist, but she also, and this is an interesting thing, she also became very spiritual. And there is some subsequent correspondence between Lacan and Dora Maar, so they continued to stay in touch. And there is even Lacan occasionally sometimes sent her an off-print of one of his papers. So there are off-prints of Lacan's papers with a dedication to Dora Maar. So, I mean, look, the treatment was successful insofar as for another 40 odd years or so, she definitely wasn't suicidal. And somehow Lacan had succeeded in getting her to reinvest her mental energies, and that includes probably also her demons, into her artistic work and into her spirituality. Yeah. But there will be much more about Dora Maar in the book.
Amazing. And so you're saying here that even though the mirror stage is presented in, I think, 1949, this overlooked method of dialectical psychoanalytic thinking, that in some sense we've missed the centrality of the dialectical approach that Lacan. Yeah, that's very interesting.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. You see, I mean, that's the disadvantage, in a sense, of us working with Lacan's écrit and us thinking that the real Lacan is the Lacan of the mirror stage, 1949, which is already, of course, a revision of a paper that had been presented in 1936. But I mean, there's much more to say about the way he practiced clinically. If you look at the manuscripts, and if you look at the correspondence, or if you look at some of his cases, because, I mean, between you and I, Daniel, but everyone is going to listen to this, I guess. I mean, the Mirror Stage article is not exactly a clinical paper. I mean, it's it's a theoretical, it's a conceptual work. It doesn't really say all that much, if anything, about technique or about cyclitic practice. But what this here shows is that at the time, Lacan was thinking very seriously about pushing the boundaries of cyclitic practice within the group to which he belonged. Yeah.
Fascinating.
But
Well,
that,
that's
as
probably,
we know,
yes, this is probably why the mirror stage has had such a wide popularity, even outside of clinical spaces, right? Because it's
yeah.
it's more than clinical methodology by far. Yeah, it makes sense. That's interesting. And of course,
Shall we move
Rudinesco
on?
shows. Yeah, sure. But one thing on mirror stage, I love the point
Sure.
that Lacan attended the Berlin Olympics hosted by the Nazis at the same time that he develops his famous mirror stage notion. And so it's always fascinating to
Well,
think about that context.
yeah, again, that's another story. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not sure he intended to go to the Berlin Olympics. I'm not sure. What I do know is that, you've heard this story before, is that when he presented his paper on the mirror stage for the first time in August 1936, that he was interrupted after 10 minutes, and that, by the way, this was his first time giving a talk abroad, and that he was absolutely, totally, utterly fuming, probably because, you know, slightly self-indulgent, arrogant person that he was expecting more than Ernest Jones saying after 10 minutes, we've heard enough of you. Let's move on. So maybe he went to the Berlin, maybe he exchanged the mirror stage for another stage in anger. Maybe it wasn't as planned. I'm not sure. Shall we move on?
Sure.
I mean, look, I'm not going to say too much about this. This, again, is not something that is in the public domain at all. This is a letter by Lacan. This is Lacan's handwriting. It's a long letter of about, let me think, about 8 pages to Michael Ballant, sent in August 1953. And the reason why I'm showing it is that 1953 was the year when there was this first massive conflict within the history of psychoanalysis in France, within French institutional psychoanalysis. And the conflict was not really, at least not initially, about Lacan's practice. It was about the organization of cyclitic training. But before long, it became a discussion about Lacan's practice, and especially the fact, and it is a fact, that Lacan was experimenting with sessions of variable length. So what is he saying here to Ballant? And again, I will read the sentence from the screen and then translate. This is the third paragraph of the page to the right of your screen, where they talk about his practice of sessions of variable length. And he says that at some point, this is actually the last sentence of the third paragraph. He says, laissons cela. He says, let us not talk about this variable length sessions anymore. Laissons cela puisque j'ai abandonné cette pratique pour des raisons professionnelles, et ceci complètement depuis janvier. So he basically says to Ballant, let's not talk about it anymore, because I've actually abandoned this practice for professional reasons, and I've done it completely since January this year. everyone who was on Lacan's couch in 1953 would have known, if they had read this letter, they would have known that he was lying through his teeth. So he's lying to Bartlett. He hasn't abandoned this practice at all. And over time, the variable length session actually became almost a practice of constant short sessions, i.e. sessions of a minute or sessions of 3 minutes. So the question that this letter, and he does actually say something similar in a letter that he writes to his own analyst Lowenstein, Rudolf Lowenstein. The question is, and again, Rudinesco doesn't really talk about it, but why is he lying? By the way, I think I tweeted something about this at some point, and I got a very disgruntled tweet back from obviously a very Lacanian who has probably also written a book on Lacan, who said, this is not lying, this is just honest dissimulation. And I thought, yeah, right, well, okay. If this is honest dissimulation rather than lying, then can you explain how the truth is dishonest revelation, please? So it's stupid. It's totally stupid, you know. But of course, you know, the hardcore Lacanians are never going to admit that Lacan was capable of lying. But hey, hang on a second. He was human, for God's sake. Of course, he was capable of lying. The question is why.
Do you speculate into the motivations of that?
Well, I do, and we don't have time to go into great depth within the space of this interview. But I think that he decided to lie because he knew that his group, the group to which he belonged, the new psychoanalytic group to which he had joined, which was called the Société Française de Psychanalyse, was never, ever, ever, ever going to become re-affiliated to the IPA if he continued to practice like this. I think he knew that already in 1953. Now then you say, why did it matter all that much, one, for him to be affiliated to the IPA, and why did it matter all that much to him to continue to practice with variable length sessions? Now, those are two different questions. Now, I think I can answer the first one. And the first one is that it mattered very, very much to the psychoanalysts because the IPA was at the time the only governing body of psychoanalysts in the world, which meant that if they admitted people into their ranks who did not have a medical degree, then the IPA would somehow guarantee or would support those people in cases of litigation or lawsuits, right? So not belonging to the IPA meant an enormous amount because it meant that people actually lost protection against lawsuits if they were not medical doctors. And there are examples of that, you see. I mean, it doesn't answer the whole debate, of course, around the lies, etc., but there you go. Lacan decided to lie, and in this way, of course, he also, how shall I put it? He also assumes, naively, I would say, he assumed that he wasn't going to be caught out, that he wasn't going to be found out, which of course he was. I mean, that's probably my next slide. Of course he was. All right, shall we move on? No, okay, no. The next slide is. Did you want to say something more about that, Daniel?
Well, let me ask one thing. I mean, so Lacan starts a school in the wake of his disbarment from the IPA, and it was being caught in this situation that compelled him to become much more of a maverick, to become much more independent. Do you think that
Yes.
he uh, desired that independence all along, so that this was how he wished to fashion himself? Or was this much more to be understood as a profound risk, which he didn't want to deal with because you have to, when it's almost like starting a business or something, um, all of that risk and that danger and that precarity. So he was independent. He was, as you say, a maverick. So was this ambivalent for him, or was it kind of welcome? Like, okay, I'm free now. I'm free from the IPA. How was he? How did he conceive of that?
It didn't matter to him personally because he was a psychiatrist, you see. So to him personally, it didn't
Mm,
matter whether he was in the IPA or not. Had absolutely no bearing on his practice because there's
mm,
no one in the world who could ever have accused him, as was the case with other people who were not medical doctors. No one in the world could have accused Lacan of illegally practicing some type of healthcare provision.
hmm.
You see, that's what it revolved around. So, on a personal level, he probably didn't care all that much. But on
Hmm.
an institutional level, this was important, IPA affiliation, because
Hmm.
there were people who weren't medical doctors.
I see.
Now, your question also reminds me of something else, and that's another story that Rudinesco doesn't mention. Um, During the early 1930s, Lacan always juggled around at least 4 or 5 women at the same time throughout his life, at least. So even when he divorced from Malou and married Sylvia Maclès, there were always other women, always. In the early 1930s, I can't say he had an affair because he wasn't married yet, but one of his lovers was the Argentine writer Victoria Ocampo, who spent some time in Paris. And so I looked at the letters. They're in Spanish. They've never been translated. And Rudinesco doesn't really know about Demida, so she doesn't talk about it in her biography. So Victoria Ocampo writes to her sister in Buenos Aires about this man she's met called Lacan, right? And there's lots of things that she tells about what he's like. But there's one thing that's always stood out for me. She says to her sister, "This man has a predilection, has a preference, seems to thrive on disorder." Right, which I interpret as he actually enjoys irregularity. So this is a guy who gets off on conflict and strife. And this is a guy who profoundly dislikes intellectual and social situations that are not riveted by some kind of conflict. And
Right.
if it's not there,
Right.
he's going to try and induce it, I would say.
Yes. Could you say something a bit more about the famous and mysterious seminar on the name of the Father, which we really, frankly, don't know much about, especially in English-speaking contexts, and how might that moment coincide with the controversy over the split from the IPA?
I mean, that is actually a very important but also very difficult question to address because it forces me to bring in both institutional, theoretical, and clinical issues. But I'll do my best to give you a brief answer. I mean, the seminar on the names of the father, of which only one session was ever delivered, takes place at a time when Lacan is still thinking that the majority of the members in his own group will oppose the IPA's ultimatum that the group can only be reintegrated on condition that Lacan and two others are barred from training, right? So during 1963, the IPA, and we can come back to that in part two, because I found another document that has never been seen or shown before. In 1963, a delegation from the IPA goes to Paris. And they go to Paris to spend a whole weekend discussing the Lacan question. This is in June. 5 months later, Lacan's group, the Société Française de Psychanalyse, they need to decide what they're going to do. They need to decide whether they're going to go with the IPA, and that means that Lacan can no longer teach, and it means that he can no longer do training analyses. It doesn't mean that he can't practice anymore, right? So the IPA would never have gone so far as to say that Lacan needs to be stripped of all his rights. They just don't want him to be a trainer or a supervisor, etc. And that means that they don't want him to deliver a seminar anymore either. Lacan thinks that the majority of the people in his group are going to oppose that ultimatum. But he's wrong. He's wrong. The majority of the group of the people, they accept it, you see. And the night before the one and only session of the seminar on the names of the father, the night before, he's informed of that decision. So the night before, he's being told that the executive of his own group has just decided to accept the IPA's conditions, and that means that he can't teach anymore, right?
Mm.
So that's the first reason as to why there's only one session, right? Because strictly speaking, he's not allowed to do it anymore. Now, the reason, I mean, we can come back to that in part two. The reason as to why the IPA was so strict was less to do with theoretical than with clinical matters, and it was less to do with psychoanalysis in general than with their concern over quality and standards, as we now call it. But what I was going to say is that when Lacan eventually resumes his seminar in 1964, he is fully, completely, utterly, totally independent. So he is no longer a member of any psychoanalytic group in January 1964. So the Seminar 11, the Four Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis, is a seminar that is delivered by Lacan as someone who doesn't belong to any psychoanalytic institution. And that's why he says in the opening paragraphs of that seminar, what authorizes me to speak to you or to teach you about the foundations of psychoanalysis? Right? So it's a rhetorical question for him, but the reason why he formulates it is that he's on his own. He's literally and not metaphorically, but he's literally outside the psychoanalytic community. Now, that raises the question, why doesn't he continue with his seminar on the names of the father? Right? So he starts teaching again, and we can talk a bit more about that in part 2. So he starts teaching, and I have an image of the room at the École Normale Supérieure. But he decides that he's going to deliver a seminar that, I mean, in its title, it could have been a seminar delivered by Heidegger, right? So Heidegger delivered seminars like that. The 4 fundamental concepts of metaphysics. There you go. Right? So he stops delivering the names of the father and decides to give a seminar on something else, for good reasons. But and we can talk about that in part 2. But in January 1964, he doesn't belong anymore to any group. I'm not sure that answers completely your question, but it's an exceptionally complicated story, because, as I said, it involves institutional conflicts, clinical issues, issues around training, but it all comes down to one problem, and the problem is called Lacan.
Incredible.
Right? And I'll show you the next time I'll show you the first page of a document that I found, which no one has ever found, and that are the minutes of the discussions that took place in June 1964 between the IPA committee and the Lacan's group, including Lacan himself. And I'll tell you what he says during those discussions and how he actually presents himself. And it's hugely interesting. But maybe before we stop today, Daniel, I can show you this one.
Yes, I've seen this photo before. I love this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, this photo is in the public domain, but this is actually the original. It was taken by Roger Munier, because whenever you look at a photograph, there's always an additional person, of course, in the picture. It's the one who takes the photograph. So this was taken by Roger Munier, who is a close friend of Heidegger's, at Lacan's country house in Guitrancourt on the 25th of August, 1953, 2 days before a week-long conference on Heidegger's work at Cerisy-la-Salle. And there's all kinds of things you could say about the photograph, and we could talk a bit more about it next time. But there's obviously Martin Heidegger to the left. Then there's Kostas Axelos, a Greek-French philosopher who also acted as the interpreter, because Martin Heidegger's spoken French was non-existent, and Heidegger's spoken German was non-existent.
But Lacan knew German.
Oh, he could read German fluently.
He could not speak it too well.
Yeah, but his spoken German was very rusty. Yeah.
I see.
But he could read German fluently.
He was a fabulous reader in the German language.
Oh yeah. He could also read Chinese, by the way, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go to the people in the picture, and then we can use that as a cliffhanger for the for part 2. So Martin Heidegger, Kostas Axelos, Greek-French philosopher who acted as the interpreter, Jacques Lacan, Jean Beaufret, who was an analysand of Lacan's. So you already also you see in the picture that Lacan didn't have any problem socializing with his own patients, right? So Jean Beaufret was an analysand of Lacan's and a close personal friend of Heidegger's. Beaufret was the recipient of Heidegger's famous letter on humanism. Then we have Heidegger's wife, Elfriede, and then we have Lacan's wife, Sylvia. And it's interesting, you see, that Sylvia is the only person here who doesn't look at the camera. You know, I mean, and to me, she's looking at her husband. I don't know where you think she's looking, but to me, she's looking at her husband. To me, I mean, by that time, by the way, she's given up her career as an actress, right? Because of him. So he that's another story as well. But she looks at her husband and she can see the joy in her husband's eyes, and it makes her happy. And I'll show you some pictures in part 2 of Sylvia 20 years later, where she looks very, very different.
And this engraving here is from Heidegger to Lacan.
Yeah, so in 1953, Lacan had already collected a small set of books by Heidegger, which he had read. And before they left to Cerisy-la-Salle on the 27th of August, he asked Martin Heidegger to sign each of Lacan's Heidegger books. So in German, it says, I can read it, it says, für je Lacan mit freundschaftlichen Erinnerung an den schönen Aufenthalt in Guitrancourt. 27th August 1955, Martin Heidegger. So it's for Jacques Lacan, in amicable memory, or with friendly memory of the beautiful stay in Guitrancourt. And Guitrancourt is where Lacan had his country house. But the reason why I chose this picture is also, and we can talk a bit more about it in part 2, is that it wasn't just Hegel as a philosopher who was very influential for Lacan. I mean, there's much more Heidegger in the quote-unquote early Lacan than Lacanians are generally willing to admit. And that Lacan himself was actually willing to admit, because Lacan was also not, I'm not going to say something that you don't know, he wasn't particularly intellectually generous. He didn't always mention his sources, or he didn't always reference properly. But you know, I'm going to argue also in my book that the reason why Heidegger was there, I'm not sure he wanted to be there in August 1953, is that Heidegger's work had a huge impact on Lacan's own thought until well into the 1960s, I would say. And I'll give you some examples of that the next time we speak.
Wonderful, Dany. Thank you so much.
Shall we stop there for today?
Yeah, let's conclude, and we'll pick it up. We'll pick up part 2 next time.
Very well, excellent. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks again.